The Battle of Iwo Jima occupies a meaningful niche in the heritage of our nation and our Corps. Marines of subsequent generations, accustomed to limited wars and restrictive rules of engagement, may find it hard to imagine the battle's sheer size and fury. The raw dimensions are staggering. 3 Marine divisions assaulting a densely fortified island from the sea. 36 days of savage, point-blank firing that won a great victory, but cost the 5 Amphibious Corps nearly 28,000 casualties. The bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. In the last and final analysis, it is the guy with the rifle and machine gun who wins and pays the penalty to preserve our liberty. My hat is off to the Marines. I think my feelings about them is best expressed by Major General Julian Smith. In a letter to his wife after Tarawa, he said, "I never again can see a United States Marine without experiencing a feeling of reverence." And that right there is the opening of an article that was written by Marine Corps Colonel Joseph H. Alexander, who was a company commander in Vietnam. And after he retired from the Marine Corps, he became a historian, an author, a scriptwriter. And probably his most famous book is a book called Utmost Savagery. He also wrote Sea Soldiers in the Cold War and also A Fellowship of Valor, the history of the United States Marine Corps. Very prolific guy. But this short article was taken from the Marine Corps Institute, or from a Marine Corps Institute document, which is called Leadership Credo. And the article itself inside Leadership Credo is called Combat Leadership at Iwo Jima. And I think there's some lessons in the article for all of us about will, human will, the breaking point, and people that don't break, but people that instead lead. So I'm going to get into this article. Here we go. Iwo Jima proved so costly to the Marines because the Japanese devised a disciplined defensive plan that maximized the island's formidable terrain and soft interior rock. Seizing Sulphur Island would demand every bit of experience gained by American amphibious forces in the 30 months since the initial landings at Guadalcanal. While the colorful Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith is widely known for his role as the senior Marine at Iwo, the real workhorse was the commander of the 5 Amphibious Corps, Major General Harry Schmidt. Schmidt had commanded that corps effectively in the seizure of Tinian the previous summer. At Iwo Jima, Schmidt would have the honor of commanding the largest landing force of Marines ever committed to a single battle. Schmidt was fortunate to have 3 veterans of the heaviest fighting of World War I commanding his divisions. Major General Graves B. Erskine, Commanding General 3rd Division, Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts with the 6th Marines. Major General Clifton B. Cates, Commanding General 4th Marine Division, Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, 2 Purple Hearts with the 6th Marines. And Major General Keller E. Rocky, Commanding General 5th Marine Division, Navy Cross with the 5th Marines. Their collective experience would prove invaluable during the prolonged battle of attrition at Iwo Jima, which often resembled the bloodbaths of the earlier war. Iwo would see the kind of fighting characterized by one Marine officer as throwing human flesh against reinforced concrete. Yeah, so you're starting off, you're going in the combat experience, having those guys that I just rattled off as these commanders of these various units, guys that are Navy Cross and Silver Star and Purple Heart recipients from the First World War. And we've covered some First World War battles, and we've covered the war broadly on this podcast before. And there's just a whole nother level of brutality and savagery that you wouldn't imagine. And so these guys, having lived through that, they're mentally somewhat, it would seem, prepared for the brutality and savagery that they're going to face at Iwo. Continuing on. To the extent humanly possible, the men in the ranks of the assault divisions had the right mix of training and experience to undertake this daunting task. The 3rd and 4th Marine Divisions were recent veterans of the Marianas Campaign, in which they virtually annihilated the Japanese 31st Army. The newly organized 5th Marine Division would be facing combat for the first time, but a good third of its members were veterans, including many former Raiders and para-Marines. Now, this is interesting because the bringing that experience in and having that experience is so helpful, but most of the people that went into D-Day on Normandy did not have combat experience. So these guys rolling in, they already know what they're getting into. They have experience. And there is like there's a huge gap between you been to combat and you ain't been to combat. There's like a huge gap. And I've talked to some of my buddies, some of the missions that we did in the global war on terror, you could pick just a random mission on a random night, going to hit a target building, whatever. If that would have happened in the 90s, when no one in a platoon, 0 people in a platoon may have had any combat experience whatsoever, we would have been so much worse, and primarily we would have been worse just because of the mentality of getting used to it. It's not quite the same as jiu-jitsu, because jiu-jitsu, it's so technical, and you can become so good with your techniques. But if you just take street fighting, like straight up street fighting, did you know guys when you were growing up, they would get in one fight a week out in the bars or whatever, out in the clubs, out in the streets. That having those couple street fights under your belt makes you so much better.
Right. It's different. Yeah.
And so I feel like this is a big beneficiary to these guys because they know what they're getting into. Now, I've heard people say about Normandy that they actually just wanted guys that hadn't been, so that they kind of had the fantasy of battle. Like, we're going to be heroic. Of course, we're going to charge in and it's going to be kind of glorious, right? They didn't want those guys to have wait a second, you want us to go on this heavily defended beach with freaking bunkered in elevated machine guns? Because if you tell an experienced combat guy, hey, here's the deal, you're going to go into an open beach with bunkered in machine guns with intersecting fields of fire, this doesn't seem like a great plan.